Welcome to the Health Tech Invest podcast powered by Nutera Ventures, your guide to healthcare investing. Join us as we explore interviews with pioneering entrepreneurs, investors, and innovative leaders, helping you spark innovation in the world of venture capital investing.
Great to finally get this up and running, Mike. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Mike Lemcke, everyone, on Health Tech Invest podcast. Mike is the Associate Director of the Venture Catalyst Program at UC. And a human being. I've known him for several years now, and I'm so happy to have you on the show. How are you, Mike?
Doing great. Yeah, thanks for having me. This is great. Excited to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mike, for and apologies for the nitro cold brew in hand. At every moment I get, I'm sipping on a nitro cold brew. Yeah, Mike, great to have you. Would love for you to, I think our podcast viewership here is healthcare indexed. So we got a lot of healthcare folks on the call, but or our listeners are in the medtech, health tech space. But we've gotten into kind of the generalist tech and the deep tech ecosystem as well. I know that just given the experience at UC Davis. There's a lot of cool stuff going on, right? From agri-tech to health tech to nutrition and everything. So would love for you to, before we get into the meat and potatoes there, I'd love for you to kind of give our listeners just an overview about your background and kind of what got you to where you're at today.
Yeah, great. I work at Venture Catalyst where we help form and grow early stage startups coming out of the University of California, Davis. Prior to this, I was working in a startup myself. So I was in the gaming space. I had a startup for about 5 years where we're launching products and doing lots of interesting things. And then prior to that, worked with a number of different corporates. I worked at Toyota. I worked at TSMC. And some other folks. And, originally, I think I got started into startups growing up. So I grew up in Silicon Valley and Palo Alto, where it's kind of, it's in the water, it's in the coffee shops, it's at the place, I'd go to lectures at Stanford. It would be at the Stanford parties that I would go to in high school. It was everywhere. And so I think, my father was in startups. My uncle was a serial entrepreneur. So I think it's part of the culture that I've been in for some time. And then here I'm at the university where there's all these just cutting edge technologies that people are playing with and working with. It's kind of that William Gibson quote of like, the future's already here. It's not evenly distributed. It's that kind of a thing here at Davis. We're in these labs and these amazing innovators that we have are working on the cutting edge and also working with areas where things collide. And to your point, we do have a lot in the health tech area in healthcare, but it's also the collisions with health that we see so much interesting things emerging. So the collision of food and health, the collision of animal health and human health, and all these collisions that we see arise. Yeah.
Amazing. I'm fascinated by this concept of you're on a lab or a bench to the commercial viability, right? So this transition that you see occur at universities, and it's amazing to me. I spun a company out of Northwestern about 15 years ago, and kind of saw it from soup to nuts, right? So was in the lab, was doing the actual wet lab work, and then 10 years later we had a company, and it was like crazy transition or evolution. So in your mind, when is the right time to approach you at Venture Catalyst? Like what is it? When is it too early? When is it too late? Like what's the Goldilocks of Venture Catalyst?
Yeah. Well, I don't think there is really a too early or too late. Really, because it's just a spectrum that technologies move along. Mm-hmm. Again, a lot of times we're at super early stages, so we engage with folks when it's just an idea. And a lot of times they just have this hard-earned secret or this insight, and they have a really interesting team, or sometimes we help them build out the team around a technology. And we also have like proof of concept funds. So this last year we invested $1.5 million in developing technologies at that early stage. So folks that had an idea, we put together a quick little study of how do we create an inflection point here? How do we prove out the feasibility study or the prototype that shows that this is going to work? And then that's enough to excite an entrepreneur or a venture capitalist to kind of come on board and really take it to the next level. And there's a lot of things we just have to figure out. Again, at the very early stage, things pivot so much that you kind of get started, you form what you think is going to be the plan, and then you kind of figure out, how do you actually navigate this through and make it real.
That's cool. That's cool. How did you end up at Davis? So you're I think that's fascinating. You grew up in Silicon Valley. It's in the water. It's in the coffee shops. What led you to Davis? Was there a
Yeah.
particular driver there?
Well, my startup was based out of Sacramento, so that we were up here, and Davis is a special little town, right? So it's like
This is your
60
gaming
to
startup? This is your
yeah.
gaming startup? Yeah.
And
Okay.
and
Cool.
so yeah, and so but Davis is a really interesting town because it's like 60 to 90,000 people surrounded by
Hmm.
farmland,
Hmm.
and we do
Hmm.
$1 billion of research every year. So like Davis is like a very amazing, and Davis reminds me growing up in Palo Alto, it's kind of the same vibes in a lot of ways that I grew up in, as far as, in Davis, I'm probably the only one without a PhD. Like everybody else has a PhD.
That's not true.
I'm the lowest common denominator probably. And my kids are growing up much like I grew up, where, I grew up and the kids, very international. A lot of the kids, all the parents are postdocs or grad students or working on technologies. And so Davis is, I haven't been able to get out of Davis. That's why I've been here for the last decade here. But it's also just a really amazing special spot.
It is a great ecosystem. I've gotten to know it over the years, and it's incredible. It definitely specializes in, the convergence of different things, right? So you've got nutrition, you've got biology, you've got agriculture, you've got AI. What makes UC Davis so great in all those areas? What's the secret behind all of this?
Well, I think a lot of it is the culture here, right? So when you have like an amazing,
Hmm.
people aren't afraid to work across different disciplines. They're not afraid to kind of work with each other. And it is a very super open and creative environment. So when I have faculty members, I can go to some amazing faculty members that are really quite accomplished. And they're busy folks. They're doing a lot. And if I bring them a really cool technology, a really cool potential collaborator, idea, or startup, their first response is usually like, "Oh, this is really cool. Let's figure out how we could, let's have lunch and discuss like how can we put this together, or how do we work together and think in that way," which is different than a lot of other cultures out there. Other cultures out there, it's what's in it for me. Like, okay, so we're going
Yeah.
to work on this technology. What am I on the cap table? What kind of portion of the cap table? You don't find that here. I think like every community you're in whispers something to you, right? And I think, this is like, I think, I think Paul Graham had a thing on this some time ago, but, in, if you're in, Bay Area, it's like in Silicon Valley, it's like be more ambitious is what it whispers to you. And it's a great culture to be in, because you really say, okay, how do I 10x everything that we're doing? And it's an amazing place to be. If you're down in
Hmm.
LA, it's like, how do I,
Hmm.
become famous? How do I get people to notice me? How do I make something of myself? In Davis, I think it is like, how do we create uncommon collaboration? How can we work together and do really interesting things? Um,
Awesome.
and so, yeah, just it's a pleasure to work with like just amazing folks out here.
Awesome. What does a day in the life look like for Mike Lemke? So you've got quite a bit of things to do. You've got a pretty vast top of funnel, I'd imagine, and then there's obviously the ultimate bottom of the funnel, which is an investment. Tell us about what day in the life looks like.
Yeah, no, great question. I do get to see a little bit of everything. So again, helping folks from that early idea stage all the way through helping them get pre-seed funding and seed funding and figuring out how to raise their funding. So throughout a day, I might oscillate across life sciences, everything from a human health intervention that we're trying to put together a SBIR grant and try to figure out how do we get funded for the technology, to helping somebody, you know, get advice on how to fix their cap table or how to approach their lawyer to figure out some kind of a contract, to then figuring out how do we get resources for folks. And so it's a very kind of, there's
Hmm.
a lot that we do. And in a way, we're a miniature startup at Venture Catalyst, where we're, people, you don't really, you have a job description, but you really kind of do whatever it takes to kind of help people through. We have four major areas that we really support people, though, helping them get early stage funding. We work a lot with the incubators. So we work with the incubators out at Aggie Square. We work at the incubators throughout the Davis and Sacramento community and the region. We work on events engaging with investors, with corporates, so that they can come and invest in the startups and invest in the research that's coming out of the university. And then we do also put on a number of different kind of events ourselves to kind of get out there. So yeah.
What are some of the biggest challenges that you see as it relates to taking, really promising technology, promising innovation, and commercializing it and spinning it out and turning it into a company?
Yeah, I think, one of the hardest things when you're spinning out a startup is sometimes, some things are so early that you have a technology, but you're really trying to figure out what the product can be. And when you're creating like future markets, right? Like a lot of those stuff that we're working on is so early that it's going to reach market 5 years from now or 6 years from now. And so you're creating a new future. And so I think that's really hard for people to conceptualize. And I think there is a challenge that you have to go through as far as like, how do I actually figure out a way to monetize this or be able to, birth this into the world? But we use a lot of different techniques and resources to help folks figure that out. So we lean super heavy on folks like yourselves, on our venture capital community, and we partner with venture capital firms to help kind of, as people go out and get investment and think things through, work with tons of mentors and serial entrepreneurs and things like that to really provide the guidance and say, okay, this is what you need to think through at those later stages. And you should start thinking of some of this super early. And then we also have programs like the NSF I-Core program where you even do customer discovery and you go out and you interview 20, 30 different stakeholders and try to figure out what is the positioning of your product? How does it fit into the world? How can you monetize it? How do you cost, who is the payer? Who is the customer? Who is the consumer of the product? And really figure out all of these different things. So I think that's a challenge, but that's also like the fun of creating a startup is figuring out all of these things. It's something that every entrepreneur there has to go through a number of kind of brick walls to get to birth their innovation and get it into the world. And so figuring out that maze and figuring out how do you get over, under, around, or through these walls is kind of the excitement in the journey.
So the concept of the venture capitalist, I mean, it sounds amazing. It's like exactly what I needed when I spun my company out of Northwestern 15 years ago, 16 years ago, and didn't exist, right? Are there other universities that create programs like Venture Catalyst, or I get the sense that UC Davis is somewhat progressive on that front?
I think, I think universities in general have just become super sophisticated, and it's been something that we've seen happen over the last 10, 15 years. And I wish we had all the resources that we have now on campus available when I was doing startups when I was in college, because again, it just helps you learn so much faster. And you have all these resources that you don't have to learn everything. You just go to the right people that can also help you with certain things and structure things properly and stuff like that. But I think a lot of the universities in general have realized that we do all of this amazing research. It's at the university that's publicly funded a lot of times, and there's amazing technologies, but those technologies aren't going to create the societal and economic impact that we want if we do not support the startup mechanism and if we do not help that portion of it. And so there's tons of resources that have gone into universities to really help bridge that gap so that the thing that starts in a lab can make it out and be successful commercially and can impact folks that are out there.
Kind of referring back to something you said with regards to the challenge that you see a lot. We see the challenge a lot in downstream in the venture capital community. So we have entrepreneurs that have a robust product or robust technology looking for a problem versus a problem that needs a technology to solve it. And so sometimes delivering that feedback to the entrepreneur can be challenging at times. Presumably you need to deliver that type of feedback all the time to professors and to researchers. What's your approach? How do you deliver that message?
Well, I always try to be as honest as I can be when it's something I've seen before and, maybe something that I know that's not going to work, because ultimately you're saving like years of somebody's life when you can point them in the right direction. Again, we also, really rely on serial entrepreneurs, people in industry and investors to also provide that feedback. And that feedback from them is worth way more than my advice to folks. Because they're like, oh, you just work for the university. And then, you know, the investor comes in and says, no, seriously, you got to think about it this way. This can't be done or something like that. And then also, again, doing these customer discovery workshops where people actually go out and talk to people about the problem that they think exists, or really try to figure out how does their technology fit into the world. You know, doing something like that really forces you to learn the lessons that you need to learn. And that's why those programs are so successful, because you go out there and you find out that people really don't care about the thing that you want to do. They really care about this second idea. And that's the one you really need to start working on. And again, by going through those customer discovery periods, it again saves tons of your time. It completely redirects your focus, redirects kind of what you're going to be working on and the solution you're going to have. And again, just can save, again, like years of your life as far as like technologies work.
Yeah. So, years of your life. That's probably the most valuable, right? So it's great that you can provide kind of that type of direction. I want to switch gears a little bit. So you were talking about kind of your move to Sacramento. So this is an observation I have. I don't know if it's a fair observation or not, but and I'd love to get your opinion on it. So I'm noticing a lot of startups kind of like creep into the Sacramento region, right? They leave Silicon Valley, they move to Sacramento, or they set up shop in Sacramento. Most of the time, it's driven by a strategic partner that they're trying to get closer to. They might have a corporate that they're trying to build a company with that's in the Sacramento region. But a lot of the time, it's also just a more affordable place to build an ecosystem, and it is a burgeoning ecosystem. What's your kind of perspectives on that? Are you seeing the Sacramento venture capital community? Just are you seeing the expansion here? Do you feel like we're in a good place for that ecosystem? Where do you see the ecosystem growing?
So I see like tremendous growth that's going to happen in the future. So if you look at the past like decade at Venture Catalyst and what we've been able to create, we've launched over 300 startups that raised $3.5 billion out of just what's here at the university.
Awesome.
And I see the ability to scale and grow this to amazing proportions. I do think it is important though for startups. There is a certain resources that you need, and you do have to be in the right place, right? And so if I were starting a pure software company, an AI company that was kind of reinventing SaaS, you do that in Silicon Valley, right? And again, sure. I would probably move the company down there very shortly. If you're doing things, the areas of intersection between health and food and animal health and certain things like that, then Davis is the place to be for that. And a lot of companies I think are recognizing that, and we have a lot of folks that are leveraging that. But I think there's way more growth to be had in that space. Because again, $1 billion of research, we have 400 million of that happens at our hospital and through our School of Medicine. Really interesting expertise in cell and gene therapy and oncology and neuroscience and foods for health, as well as all of these other kind of tools that people can put to use. And so I think there's just going to continue to be growth there.
Awesome. Yeah, you mentioned the animal sciences program, the vet school, right? So the UC Davis is second to none, right? It's the number one vet school. I think that's awesome. I'm starting to see, and I see this in our portfolio, a couple of our companies on the life sciences side are, there's an angle into the animal sciences side of the equation as well as into the human health side of the equation. And so we're calling that kind of One Health, right? I wouldn't say we're calling it that, but that's what the industry calls it, right? One Health initiative. What's your kind of perspective on that? What's your or UC Davis's perspective on One Health?
Yeah, well, I think there is just so many different areas where that crosses over. So we use that. I mean, when you're working with animals, I mean, UC Davis vet school sees some 30,000 patients, right? They see 5,000 dogs, right? Like, so yep. When you start working on treatments that have this crossover, you suddenly don't have as many of the regulations that you might have, but you're still working with all of the health benefits. And so there's all these areas where you can be with companion animals or large animals or even small animals and be able to see the benefit there. And then how do those things translate? And ultimately, when you look at it, my daughter who's 8 years old was quizzing me the other day on how the percentage genetically we are like other animals, right? And other mammals specifically. And it is absolutely insane how close we are from a lot of that biologic point of view. And so I think there's huge capabilities there. So we've seen it, a lot of our innovators leverage that closeness and leverage having all of those resources as well. I work with some researchers, Dr. Farmer and Dr. Wong that have figured out how to treat spina bifida, right? And so they've basically figured out
Yes.
how to create this stem cell matrix that they actually put on in the womb and actually heals babies that have spina bifida, where they're born with a spinal cord outside of their back there. But there's a lot of animal models that have that as well. So before they went in humans, they got to test it on French bulldogs that have spina bifida all the time. And you have these
Yeah.
dogs that are running around, and you're like, okay, this can work in that scenario. We've tested it in that scenario. Let's go now take this to humans. And I think it's a really special thing to be able to work between those two things. And we have a lot of companies that, again, it's amazing also how many solutions start on the animal side. And we're like, well, we can use those in humans. And there's way more value from like a venture point of view in the human side. And so there's ones that have been adopted both ways. So it's super helpful to have that.
Amazing. Different innovation models out there, right? In the universities out there, right? You've got kind of inside out innovation. We were just talking about that, right? You interact a lot with professors, and some of the time you're telling them, look, this is an interesting technology, but there's not real unmet need here today. There might be in the future, and let's revisit this in the future, right? But there's other innovation models out there that are pretty compelling, outside in, right? So what do
Mm-hmm.
if you have a startup company that is, that was built outside of the university, but are looking for a university partner like University of California, Davis, what sort of advice do you give that entrepreneur? Should they connect with you? Should they connect with someone else? What's the and how does one partner with the university?
Yeah. I think that's a great question. And there are like different ways technologies flow through a company. So, I mean, through the university. So maybe we could just start at the like, what are the different pathways to commercialization, and then talk about like this the thing that me and you have talked about at length
Yeah.
over coffee and stuff. But I think there's one model I saw out of Mike Cohn that still runs Berkeley's IP office for years. Had a really interesting. He had kind of four pathways, but I'd add a fifth to it. But one is, you can milk technologies out of a university like a typical corporate might do. You sponsor research in a certain area, you get certain benefits, you take it off campus, and then you kind of move forward. You can also mine it, and this is where you see a lot in the Bay Area, where folks that are entrepreneurs just sit around universities and kind of look at technology areas and then spin up companies that kind of might make sense in certain areas. You can morph companies out of the university. And so that's where organically through research, you kind of make a discovery, and then the grad student kind of goes and leaves with a serial entrepreneur, and they form a startup and kind of just morphs out of that or kind of organically. Sometimes you're able to develop a technology so far along through grants and grants and grants, and it takes a long time, but it finally reaches a point where you can also just market it and you can license out that technology. So I think those are the main four ways. The fifth way that I think that me and you've talked about in some point, and I think is a huge value add. There's how do you spin companies out of the university? How do we spin them in? Is this huge value proposition, right? And so there's a lot of startups that can leverage all the benefits of the university. There's so many resources. If you think about the university, it is just a basket of resources. There is talent. There is specialized equipment. There's $1 million equipment that it was, purchased with really important grants that you can use. There's the knowledge base, and all of these different things can play together. And so what we've seen a lot at Venture Catalyst, we did an international soft landing program for the last few years. It's been hugely successful, where you have some of these folks that come from smaller countries where to launch a startup, you literally have to go somewhere else, right? Like, it is not a big enough market to be in a small country like Chile, or if you're in some of these even European countries that are pretty small, you have to go to a big market to really scale. And so there's a huge opportunity, again, when it aligns with your company, to be in that place to use those resources. And what's nice is usually we see these companies and it's got a good entrepreneur on it. It's a de-risked technology. They have a little bit of funding, and then they get to plug into this ecosystem where it's all these adjacent connections, all of these amazing resources that they can just kind of use ad hoc to really reach that next level of their company. And so, I think it's a huge opportunity. It's something we continue to work on. I think that's going to be where we see kind of double our growth, is working with a lot of these companies. Who to go to? There's a number of folks you can go into the university that are super helpful. Again, if you're an
Hmm.
early stage startup, like Venture Catalyst is the place to kind of go, because again, we know how to work with early stage startups. If you have a
Hmm.
good sizable startup and you're Series A, Series B, you have a good chunk of money, and you can plug in. Also, Foundation and Corporate Engagement does a really good job of working with the university. Our Health Ventures office does a really good job if you're
Hmm.
squarely in the health space. How do you actually plug into the university, to the health system as well? And then there's a few different centers depending on what your area of focus is, right? If you're in the food space, our Innovation Institute for Food and Health knows all the researchers that are doing everything in the food space and really can unlock certain things as well. So I think sometimes it's like just coming to the right person. But again, at Davis, like
Hmm.
everybody's super
Hmm.
open and wants to see people succeed and wants to see technologies grow and be useful. And so I think it's kind of just reaching out and trying to figure out how to navigate it. But there's plenty of ways to do so.
Sounds like it's not a one size fits all, right? It sounds like depends on where you are in the journey, right? I think the feedback that I hear, and again, we've got a portfolio that's relatively stage agnostic. We have kind of seed, pre-seed companies. We also have kind of Series B and onward, so later stage companies. But regardless of the stage, I think navigating an academic institution is very difficult, right? That's the feedback that we hear, right? And
I
so I
think.
think I think UC Davis, from my observations, is uniquely positioned to be very receptive to the
Mhm.
startup ecosystem. But if one of those companies were to want to collaborate with UC Davis, would you recommend they come to you, or is I guess it depends on the stage.
Yeah.
But I mean, at the end of the day, there are very there's a lot going on at a university. So what's your kind of like, what do you want to see as a startup approaches you, so that you believe you're not wasting your time and the university's resources? What are some tangible things you'd want to hear from the entrepreneur before kind of going to bat for them?
Well, it's always good for an entrepreneur to have, a clear story. So again, like non-confidential deck tells me a lot about folks. And then like ultimately what is your next value inflection point and what are you looking for
Hmm.
from the university, right? Once you know those
Fair
things,
point.
again, it could be pointed to the right people who could be then their guide, right? And the
Yeah.
academic institutions are hard to navigate because there's people everywhere working on their own solutions and creating amazing things. And so you do need that person who's like, oh, I know this person works on this and you should go to this place for this equipment. But again, it's finding that right kind of sage that can kind of just be like, okay, that understands all those different areas. But it's really important from our side to understand, what is a startup doing and what are their immediate goals and could there be a value add there that we can help in some way. And there's also resources around the university that are really interesting. But yeah, and then it's always good to do a visit, right? When we do this international soft landing program, usually these startups don't just like, you know, move here immediately. Usually they come, they visit, they plug in with all the different folks in the region, get to meet a lot of people, and then they usually go home and figure out, okay, I got to go tell my husband that we're moving to California, or like I'm going to send my
Yeah.
CTO there, and the rest of the company's going to stay in our home country, and our CTO is going to go develop this new area of technology that makes sense in Davis. And so yeah, we see kind of a lot of different things. It's hard to kind of narrow it down to one recommendation, but I think there's a lot of different ways it can move forward.
I love it. I love it. Our CEO always calls it be intentional, right? So if you're approaching someone, be intentional. Why are you approaching? and what benefit, what sort of mutual benefits are there to the approach, right? Don't just approach someone without a clear storyline. So I
Yeah.
like that a lot. That's a really that's good advice to entrepreneurs. Very cool. So where do you see venture catalyst going? So 5, 10, 20 years down the road, what's the speaking of being intentional, what are you trying to build here?
Yeah, well, again, I've seen the growth of the last kind of almost decade here, last 8 years. And it's really amazing. I think this level of sophistication of startups that have emerging and just the exciting stories that are in coming out of Davis are really great. I think the next level of Davis is really supercharging the ecosystem. And so we're doing a lot more as far as bringing in investors, bringing in even some of the large corporates and things like that. And I think a lot of people have realized the power that UC Davis can have in developing really interesting things. So I think, we've done a lot building a structure, and now we kind of got to really pour on the gasoline to get this fire going. I don't know. I'm suddenly using like a Burning Man reference, I guess. But like in order to get this really exciting here, I think right now we're working on really building out the capital stack that's around the university, working with a lot of investors that are putting in capital, investing in some of the most exciting startups. And so that is really kind of where we're at right now. And it's going to be exciting next decade here that's going to flow from it. So.
Again, I was, thank you for showing me around yesterday. It blew me away. The facility is very robust. Are you allowed to talk about Aggie Square yet? Or is it,
Yeah,
I don't know if it's
absolutely.
formally launched or not, but awesome. Tell us about Aggie Square.
The doors
I'd love to learn more about it.
are just opening. So Aggie Square has been,
Okay.
cooking for the last 7, 8 years. So it's amazing that now the doors are open, the labs are open, the labs have all the equipment in them and everything else. But if you look at it, Aggie Square is an innovation park that is in Sacramento, and it's a $1 billion innovation park. So it's 3 buildings there that are being built up. 2 of them have already been built to host life science innovation, to host a lot of the amazing things that are coming out of the university. It was done in a really interesting way in a public-private partnership. So it's really inclusive of the community that's in Oak Park in Sacramento. So the community uses a lot of that bottom floor of Aggie Square to do a lot of really interesting events. Startups use that space quite a bit as well to be able to host events, to be able to have incubator space, lab space, wet lab, dry lab. And then we have the university that takes up, about 60% of Aggie Square is the university. And then large corporates can also coexist and co-work in this space. And so this has been these innovation districts are hugely helpful for vitalizing certain areas and doing really interesting things. And so we're working with this company, Wexford. They did it in Cambridge, is where they start out, and in Boston, and had huge success there. And then they've now done a number of these different things throughout. Our chancellor that we have at UC Davis originally came from Georgia Tech, and Georgia Tech had Tech Square, right, in Atlanta. And then Georgia Tech, that was, basically equidistant to how Davis is from Sacramento. But I think it's going to be really amazing. We have 300,000 square feet of lab space that is going to be able to do life science technologies. It's a lot of lab space, but we have a lot going on. If you think about it, again, UC Davis has $1 billion of research, and we're kind of overflowing the wet lab space, right? If you look at these incubators, they start overflowing and doing really interesting things. And so this builds more capacity for companies from starting out to growing to 15-member teams to, taking down an entire floor of that building is going to be really interesting to see over the next little bit. And it's really great to bring more of Davis to Sacramento, to really bring life sciences in a really big way to Sacramento. It's going to be really interesting to see that grow in the next 10 years as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm looking forward to, again, thanks for the tour yesterday. Looking forward to being part of the ecosystem and contributing the best we can. And it's a super impressive space. Really appreciated it. Yeah, so Mike, thank you so much for the time here. I really enjoyed this conversation. We talk pretty regularly, so it's kind of weird to record a conversation, but I always learn something. Every conversation we have, I learn something new about you. I think today I don't think I knew about the startup, but I didn't know it was a gaming startup, and I didn't realize it was Sacramento. So
Yeah.
that's cool. So I learned something new today, and then of course always love hearing about the context you provide around the different innovation models. I learn a lot from our conversations, and I really respect what you're doing to Venture Catalyst. What for the listeners out there? Where can people follow your work? How can they reach out to you?
Yeah, if you want to like just plug in and see what's coming out of Davis and what we're working on, we have a newsletter that goes out to folks every month, which I think does a really great job of summarizing what startups are getting funded, which innovations are moving forward that are really interesting, where are certain things moving in clinical trials and things like that. And then also just checking in, and the Innovation Economic Development Office is our grand department where they can see other things that are happening at Aggie Square, at the Health Ventures office, and at Venture Catalyst.
Where can people read the newsletter? Do people sign up on the
Yeah,
website?
so you can
Can
just
they
sign up
reach
on the
out to you
website
directly?
or reach out, and
Awesome.
I'll be happy
Awesome.
to send it to them too. Yeah.
Cool. If it's a complicated URL, maybe don't need to disclose it, but you're Mike Lemcke. You are on LinkedIn, correct?
Yeah,
And that's
absolutely.
Lemcke, Lemcke, correct?
Yep,
That's
absolutely.
okay. Awesome. Awesome. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Mike Lemcke, reach out to him on LinkedIn. He is very responsive. That's actually how I got connected to folks in the ecosystem. It's all been through Mike Lemke. So I still remember reaching out 2 years ago saying, hey, I'm checking out the ecosystem, looking to network. And then boom, days
Yep.
later, we're at a coffee shop, and weeks later, I'm plugged into all the key players. So it's been,
Yeah.
yeah,
We,
super, super
we
great
spun you
journey
in,
working with you.
Tom. We spun you into the university.
I have no choice. No choice.
Yeah.
No, it's been a great ecosystem. Okay, awesome chatting. Thank you so much for your
Great.
time.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining Health Tech Invest.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on the Health Tech Invest podcast, powered by Natera Ventures, your go-to source for healthcare and tech venture investing. For additional information, resources, and ways to connect with us, please visit nateraventures.com. Together, let's spark innovation for the future of tech and healthcare investing.